Hi everyone, today I want to talk to you about fusions and fragment events and how as a free-to-play player I complete them and save for them and all the things I do on a sort of day-to-day basis between these fusion and fragment events so that I can make sure I get them. As I've said before, both of my accounts that I have are completely free-to-play, so I rely on free-to-play friendly champions quite a lot. I would say there's probably a fusion or fragment champion or free-to-play friendly champion in every single one of my teams. For example, I use Arb in Arena, Arbiter in Arena, and I use Helicath in both of my accounts' clan boss teams, and they're both on Ultra Nightmare. So I rely on those champions quite heavily. So the first thing we need to talk about really, gems and energy management. They go hand in hand because I use my gems to top up energy in these events. So I don't spend my gems at all. I never buy shard packs. All of my shards come from Clan Boss. So as you can see, I've currently got 10 Sacreds, 9 Void and 13 Ancients. I'm quite low on Ancients because I pulled some for the last Fusion event. I used one of the rares from the last Fusion event as food by accident, so I missed out on that champion, so I desperately pulled my ancient shards just to try and get back to that. So generally speaking, I would say energy and gems go hand in hand. Try and save as much energy as you can. I'll show you my inbox now. I've got a couple of bits in my inbox that I need to use in the next couple of days, but generally I use it to save energy. It's all about the energy from the free gifts we get off Polarium every day. So I save them as much as possible. The other place I get energy from is from the clan shop when I have enough clan gold, which at the moment I have quite a bit. So there's no energy there, but it's normally in the second slot. And you can buy up to 1,000 energy in there. So that normally coincides with the first event, which is just a nice little cap for the first dungeon event. And then the other place you can get energy from easily is from the bazaar. So you can get 300 energy for 1,000 gold bars, which if you've already done the Drax fusion, like me, there isn't much point in getting any of this other stuff, apart from a couple of bits that we might talk about later. So the energy is just something I get, and I always have enough gold bars to do so. Talking about energy brings me quite nicely into the next subject I want to talk about, which is dungeons. So as a free-to-play player, it was really hard for me to get into the fusions right at the start, as sort of early to mid-game. So it wasn't until I got Seal of the Drakes, and started moving up in the dungeon stages until I got to about stage 17 that I could actually complete them. So my advice as a free-to-play player, and it might sound daunting, but wait until you get to stage 17 and then you can farm some serious gear and get the points that you need to complete these fusions. They go hand in hand together. You need the champions to be able to beat the dungeon stages, and you need gear to be able to put on those champions. So getting to that high stage and really pushing yourself on those dungeons can work really well. So in the past, and in the last couple of fusion and fragment summon events, in the dungeon runs you've needed about 2,250 energy per dungeon. So I'll just show you the dungeons that they do in these events. So it'll be the Ice Golem's Peak, Spider's Den, Dragon's Lair and Fire Knight's Castle. So those 4 core dungeons are normally the events. So for each one, 2,250 energy. So if we go into the Dragon's Lair, I generally do stage 20. I don't do any higher on any of the other dungeons because I want 100% runs for every single one, so I get the optimum completion for the amount of energy that I'm spending. 2,250 points is a lot to get, so I need to manage that energy quite well. So the way I view it is there's a chance percentage to get anything higher than a rare piece of gear at stage 20. So I do all of my calculations from only receiving rare gear. So generally speaking, I use some calculations to work out the efficiency to run these dungeons. One 5-star rare piece of gear is worth generally, and in the past, 16 points per piece of gear. So I base all of my calculations on that sort of minimum requirement or minimum thing that I can get from the dungeons, which does make the calculations quite easy. 2,250 divided by 16 points per piece of gear, 16 energy per run, brings you out to about 140. So generally speaking, you need to do about 140 runs on each dungeon to make sure that you get that minimum requirement to get the fusion shard or the rare champion that you need to make your fusion. So I do that and do it across all of the different dungeons. You get a nice chunk of gear, and if you use anything like the RSL helper, you can do the free refills or the automatic refills and just set the number of runs to 140. There is now the function of doing the double up for each dungeon run, so you get 2 pieces of gear. Again, I still just work it out as the minimum requirement, so instead of being 140 runs, it needs to be about 70 runs. I say it needs to be about however many runs, because sometimes you might be able to get a shard, you might be able to get an ancient shard from these runs, or just a mystery shard, or you can get a couple of mystery shards, which will put your calculations into whack. But it's quite easy just to run a couple of extra ones at the end of your 140 or 70 runs, just to top it up and make sure that you get those points in. And that does bring me on to the next thing I want to talk about, which is your shard management. So from what I found, I keep a minimum of 7 sacred shards at all times. Generally, they run a champion chase tournament and a summon rush event. So the sacred shards that I save are generally for the summon rush event, because you have to pull the higher level shards to get the points that you need to complete it. And generally, if your luck is really bad, it's quite hard to achieve those points unless you have a minimum of 7 sacred shards. It sounds like a lot, and it's quite tempting to pull those shards quite often, especially if there's a ×2 event on a different shard, and I don't get very lucky. I always want to pull the sacred shards, but I save a minimum of 7 for that summer rush event. The champion chase is a bit of a different story, because there's different ways you can get champions, and you get points for each champion you pull, and for different rarities. So as you can see, my mystery shards, I always keep as many mystery shards as I can. I always buy them from the shop. If I can go to the shop, I always buy them from the shop at every opportunity, and I just hoard them, because if you're off the points, if you don't have enough shards to get the points for your champion chase tournament, then you might be able to top up by 500 if you pull 500 mystery shards. So I always just keep as many mystery shards as I can. Again, I have pulled quite a few of my ancient shards recently, because of the last fusion. And generally speaking, the champion chase is in line with the ×2 event, so you can normally get some nice champions, and if you're lucky, you might get a couple of legendaries alongside getting points for the legendary for the fusion or fragment. So it's always good to keep some shards around. My advice would be, don't pull any shards in between either a ×2 event or a fragment or fusion event. So moving on, the next thing I want to talk about is the arena events, the arena tournaments. So in my experience, generally, if you're in Gold 1 or above, these are quite achievable events, as long as you're using all of the coins and all of the resources that you have for arena. Play smart. You know, if you've got to Gold 1, you've probably got a decent team, and you've probably figured out how arena works. Speed generally is how arena works for me. Arena's a hard one to talk about, because you just have to sort of pick your battles, make sure that you get your wins in for the day, and make sure you use all the coins that you get, all the free coins you get. I've never failed an arena event. I use all of my gold coins every day anyway, or my arena coins every day anyway, so it's just part of my sort of daily routine at this point. Sometimes it can be hard to time manage when I've got a full-time job, if I need to do 140 dungeon runs and make sure I use all of my arena currency, but if you want that fusion enough, you can make it work. So I don't really have much else to say on the arena. Use up all of your arena tokens, make sure you're getting your wins in, make sure you're choosing your battles. If it looks like a team that's going to absolutely crush you, maybe don't fight it this one time, and try and find one. Use your refreshes and try and find a team that you can beat to make sure that you get those arena points in. The next thing to talk about is the champion training events. So for me, these are the hardest ones. They're the hardest ones to to manage my time with. Working a full-time job, I don't have all day to sit around and just level champions, level food. So I do find it quite hard to make sure that I'm leveling that food. I do play Raid on a PC. I've got a laptop that I play it on, so I have downloaded the RSL helper just to be able to run campaign and level up food just in the background. It's a really useful tool, but I appreciate that not everyone can use it. So one of my bits of advice for the next fusion coming up is we've got all of these auto battles that we've just been given for free. So I would save those as much as possible so you can really utilise them with champion training and levelling up food. I can appreciate if you've got a fast campaign farm, it can be quite boring just to sit there over and over and over again, just watching the same thing happen over and over again. I'll just do an example of mine. I think my farm's about 8 seconds. So I just put in some food. I've got Biggin in there. He's going to go in. And yeah, I can appreciate if it's a fast farm, it can be quite boring just to sit there and watch it over and over again. But if you want the fusion enough, and if you want that Lego enough, then it's something you need to do. So there's Biggin. 8-second farm. So it can be boring, but with an 8-second farmer, with a fast campaign farmer, you can do these champion training events quite easily. They don't take long at all if your campaign farm is fast. So my advice is to find a champion that has an AoE A1, or all AoEs for every ability they have, for every of their A1, 2, 3, 4. Find one that has an AoE one and that can really smack. So on this account I have Biggin, and on my other account I have Ray, and they both have AoE for all of their attacks. The second thing with champion training is when you're ranking up your champions, even if it's food, I always level up with a couple of brews if I can, the food that I'm using. So here, for example, I would use, I think that's Hatchet Slinger, I think his name is. I would level him up with a couple of brews just to make sure that I'm getting in all the points that I can. Don't go overboard and use all of your brews on your food, because you might want that for a different champion, maybe the fusion champion or fragment champion when you get it. But I find even if you have to run those food champions through campaign, you build up your points massively by leveling up your food as well as the champions that you're upgrading and leveling to 60, for example. Another thing I do is generally I always keep some 5-star food, so I can bring a 5-star champ to 6-star. On my other account and in my last video I was talking about the Demitha that I got in a shard pool. She is still level 50. She has level 50 food ready to go, or 5-star food ready to go for the next champion training event. And I always keep, this is what I farm in my spare time when I have an XP booster in between fusions and fragments. And then last but not least, and one of the things that I generally think about on a day-to-day basis between fusion and fragment events is artifact enhancement events. So for me, I need about 15 million per artifact enhancement event, and there's generally 2 to 3 per fusion or fragment. I don't spend silver in between these events. I don't re-gear champs because I just can't afford it. I can't afford to do spider runs endlessly to make silver to be able to re-gear my champions. So any builds that I do and any new champs, apart from some really specific ones like when I built my Helicaf team for my other account, I will just hoard my silver as much as possible. I will do the daily stuff and the daily leveling of gear to get my quests done, but generally speaking, I save all of my silver at all times ready for these fusion events. So with that being said, I do understand that it does seem like quite a boring daily grind that I do. I don't really have much fun between these fusion events or ×2 shard pull events. I just play the game in the background while I'm living my life, and then when a fusion or fragment does come up, I have the resources to do it, and I get that champion that could be a crucial part of my team. It could be the next Arbiter, Scylla the Drakes, or Helicaf, and it could bring you up from just being in the mid game to be end game. So I think it's really important, and I think it's really hard to incorporate Raid Shadow Legends into your life every day when it's this full on. So I find doing those grindy bits in between and then spending a weekend re-gearing my team because there's a fusion event on and I can get sort of double the reward for doing so, and that's how I like playing the game. That's what I enjoy doing. So thanks for watching, guys. Good luck in the next Fusion event or Fragment event, whichever one it is. I've heard the champion's really strong, top tier, so my advice would be absolutely try and go for this Fusion. If you're on stage 15 to 16 on a dungeon, try and push up to 17, try and push as high as you can, so then you can utilise those dungeons to get the points you need for the Fragment or Fusion. Good luck, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.